Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're dropping straight into a bleak, gray landscape of war, but not from the perspective of a frontline soldier charging into battle. Instead, we're looking through the eyes of Lucas, a signals operator sitting in an abandoned schoolroom totally tethered to a telegraph machine. This is the fourth week of October, and we're going to see exactly how a massive human catastrophe is filtered, ignored, and ultimately normalized through the cold, rigid mechanics of bureaucracy. We're going to track this systemic breakdown across four distinct phases: the human mechanism, the illusion of control, the grammar of collapse, and finally, the endless loop. Let's start with phase one, the human mechanism, or man as a machine. In our story, Lucas is essentially reduced to a biological extension of his telegraph machine. He works these grueling 8-hour shifts, right? Just writing down that persistent cricket-like clicking, handing it off, and repeating. And to cope with the sheer trauma of a disintegrating frontline, Lucas does something fascinating. He anchors his mind to a physical object. He obsessively repeats its origin to himself: a Type 4B field telegraph, Soviet manufacture, 1937. Focusing on its cracked canvas and that smell of hot dust literally becomes his psychological grounding mechanism in a world that's completely falling apart. He actually takes this a step further, turning his own physical movements into a strict mechanism. He counts exactly 43 steps from his table to a gap in the courtyard wall. Now, this courtyard used to hold chickens. Now it's just feathers pressed into the mud. But Lucas, he doesn't think about the destroyed world around him. He only thinks about the number 43. Then, it's exactly 37 steps from the gap to the administrative building. He's totally internalized this rigid pattern just to ground his reality. The path is so deeply inscribed into his muscle memory that he can walk it with his eyes closed. His body becomes nothing more than a vehicle moving between 2 points. And finally, 22 steps up the stairs. This completely cements a loop of movement that exists purely to serve the apparatus. 43, 37, 22. You see, unlike the war, and unlike those constantly shifting front lines, these numbers are reliable. They do not change. So here's the absolutely crucial point. To survive as this human mechanism, Lucas has to actively prevent himself from absorbing the horrific meaning of the casualty reports he's carrying. He explicitly notes that his only skill lies in becoming a bridge between the sound and the paper. If he were to pause, if he were to actually understand the meaning that a bridge was just destroyed, that an observation post was wiped out, that real men are dying, he would break. So he must remain a machine. Moving on to phase two, the illusion of control, and what it means to simply be a coordinate. This brings us to Major Andreev, a man hovering over old maps, desperately trying to make sense of a war that is quite literally vanishing around him. He perfectly defines this illusion of control. He relies on outdated maps to pretend they're stable points of reference. He tells Lucas that holding doesn't mean fighting bravely. It just means being a fixed coordinate. It's a darkly ironic twist of military bureaucracy. As long as they stay in one place, someone at higher headquarters can look at a map and make calculations. They aren't soldiers anymore. They're just data points. And throughout the narrative, you constantly see this sharp, emotionless language of the telegraph clashing violently with the deteriorating, gritty reality on the ground. Military doctrine dictates phrases like hold, stop, while the incoming messages are practically screaming about severed lines, insufficient morphine, and massive casualties. The bureaucracy completely refuses to accommodate the messy reality of death. It demands that chaos format itself neatly into standardized military telegraph codes. Which brings us to phase three, the grammar of collapse, or a slow subtraction. As the communications network breaks down, we get to observe what Major Andreev calls the grammar of collapse. And it isn't a sudden, massive explosion. It's a slow, agonizing subtraction. The shrinking net means the silences between telegraphs just grow longer and longer as adjacent nodes are wiped off the map. On day 1, Lucas is running messages constantly. By day 4, observation posts go entirely dark. Then, entire sectors shrink down to tiny fragments, until finally they're just broadcasting into the void. The absence of messages literally becomes the most terrifying message of all. When the end inevitably comes, their routine is dictated by this deeply absurd bureaucratic destruction protocol. First, they receive withdrawal orders. Second, they burn all their sensitive materials and maps. Third, Lucas takes a heavy iron hammer and literally smashes his precious 1937 Type 4B telegraph to pieces. They systematically erase all evidence that they were ever even there, basically turning themselves into ghosts before blindly retreating to a rally point.
But right in the middle of this mechanical collapse, humanity somehow leaks through the cracks. It happens when a neighboring unit completely breaks standard formatting to simply apologize for dying, writing, "Can no longer hold current position, stop, sorry, stop." It's incredibly striking, isn't it? In a system that only allows for received and understood, those 5 letters, SORRY, represent a profound crack in the armor. It's this desperate flash of human despair pushing right through the rigid code.
And in an act of profound defiance, right before destroying their first machine, Lucas sends a final message into the void and receives a breathtakingly human confirmation that they existed. Just before Lucas smashes his machine, his fellow operator, Felix, begs him to send one last message to absolutely anyone out there. "We were here, stop." And miraculously, out of the void, someone breaks format to answer, "You were there, stop." It's a desperate, beautiful validation of their existence right before the node goes entirely dark. Finally, we reach phase 4, the endless loop, where it feels like this same day is just repeating over and over. Because the true existential horror of this narrative is that the story doesn't actually end when they retreat. The nightmare just starts all over again. Despite destroying their machines and abandoning their posts, they are trapped in this relentless cycle. They arrive at a new doomed location, maybe a barn, maybe a municipal office, and immediately unpack a brand new Type 6 or Type 4B telegraph. Lucas is back down, the clicking resumes. They haven't escaped at all. They've really just hit reset on their own destruction. And the physical toll of this loop is absolutely staggering. The unit slowly evaporates from 147 men down to just 80. Major Andreev notes that the mathematics here are simple and brutal. They retreat, they lose men, they reestablish, they're attacked, and they retreat again. They are a unit in the active, ongoing process of evaporating. Another young operator, Pasha, comes to a heartbreaking realization that really captures the weight of this endless attrition. He realizes they aren't even moving through space anymore. They're just moving through repetition. Sure, the location changes, but the typing, the smashing, the walking, they are all identical. It really makes you question whether time itself is even moving forward anymore, or if they're just trapped in a closed system that's feeding entirely on itself. When you're trapped in an infinite loop like this, there are essentially 3 archetypes for how people cope. The commander, like Major Andreev, relies on doomed strategy and marked maps, only to be forced to eventually burn them. The civilian, represented by an old woman sitting quietly in a church, simply accepts permanence. She refuses to move, becoming the only true continuity in the story. And then there is the operator, Lucas. He surrenders his humanity to the pattern. He allows the numbers and the walking to completely overwrite his own mind, fully submitting himself to the mechanism. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If we reduce ourselves entirely to the systems we serve, what is left of us when those systems inevitably collapse? When his telegraph is smashed, Lucas feels like he is literally nothing. The network is the only thing that tells him he exists. If you strip away your daily repetitions, your function within the grander machine, what really remains? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep thinking on that, and until next time, stay curious.